Hello and welcome to this game review. In this one we will talk about how to find plans and how they're basically always about the pawn structure. Unless we're in the opening, then we can think about opening principles and we should develop pieces. So let's take a look. So this was the Trompovsky, which is an opening. Here e3 was played very quickly, and the first rule I want to tell you is never play a simple move in less than 9 seconds, because you will never lose on time, and you will have the chance to at least think of some candidate moves before deciding on a move. And here it's hard for me to understand why we're not playing e4, because in the opening it is said that we should play for the center, and if we can get 2 pawns in the center, there is no reason not to do this. So it's hard to understand why we're playing e3 in 2 seconds. But okay, h6. And here bishop f6 was played very quickly, but generally we should not give up the bishop so easily, as bishops are better than knights usually, especially in the opening when there's a lot of flexibility in the pawn structure. Should just move away the bishop, and if black wants to give us a hook with h4, we can oblige, and his king side will be slightly weakened. But bishop f6, we're just giving up the bishop pair and not really getting anything in return. So now black is slightly better because of the unopposed dark squared bishop. So white develops quite sensibly. Bishop g4, but this is the same mistake as white did. After h3, black has to take, and now black has lost the bishop pair, so it's not clear what the point here was. So now black plays e5. Strategically, this makes sense to open up the dark squared bishop, or at least try to. But now this pawn on b7 is simply hanging, which white takes, and now white is up a pawn. So currently we don't really need a plan at the moment because there are things that are hanging, so we should first deal with this. White takes on c3, on e5, and this is a slight mistake because this allows the opponent to improve their pieces. Now after the knight takes or the bishop takes, the pieces have a lot more scope. Instead, if white had simply kept the tension with c3, now if black ever takes, we will take back, and this bishop is blocked by this pawn on d4, so we're doing quite well. But okay, these are minor mistakes. Bishop e5, rook a b1. So this defends the pawn on b2, which is quite passive, but I guess this works. Rook b8, queen a7, rook b2. Now we get to exchange, and now we get to this position where white is again a pawn up. Up until here, both sides were playing very quickly, so again, we have to understand that chess is a very slow game when played in high quality, so we can't really blame ourselves for not finding a good plan if we don't look for a good plan consciously. And here we should have slowed down and thought about what we should do in general. And here a simple move rook b1 is good because it improves the rook from f1 and it gets it to even b7, which will grant us a winning position. And also about the plan, well, we have to look at the pawn structure. So we have a pawn advantage. We have to find this pawn. Where is it? It's here. And this suggests that we should just push the pawn to a8 because there's no one stopping it. And the further the pawn goes, the more powerful it will become. So we can combine improving the rook with pushing the pawn. For example, rook b1. Let's say the bishop goes home. And we can play a4 or rook b7. And again, the further the pawn goes, the more dangerous it will become. And at some point, we might just win a rook for the pawn. And it's not clear how black is going to stop this. Said knight c4, but it's not really clear why we're improving the knight instead of the rook, because the rook is clearly the better piece. It's worth 5 points instead of the knight's 3 points. So when we have a rook that's not improved, we should do it instead of a knight. Also, the knight, it's not clear where exactly it's going. With the rook, it's clear. He wants to go to b7 to take some stuff, but the knight, it's not clear. Well, okay, rook b1 now. d5, knight e5, knight e5, bishop e2. Giving up the bishop is, it's possible, because at this point it doesn't really matter anymore. We have this pawn, and we should just push it, but okay, bishop e2 is possible. Queen d6, black kind of finishes development. Now it's not clear what exactly our pieces are doing, but still, the plan remains the same. This is the beauty about pawn structures, they don't really change that much. when they do change, we have to keep this in mind. But at the moment, it's still the same. Our extra pawn is over here. And the point of having an extra pawn is to queen it. So we could just play a4, move the knight away, play a5, a6, move the queen, a7, a8. And although this does take quite a while, it's not clear how black is going to do anything in the meantime, as he doesn't really have any targets on our king side or anywhere else. But f4 is a great mistake, firstly because it weakens our king for no reason at all. It weakens the pawn on e3 because it will never be possible to defend it. After knight c6, we are forced to exchange knights, and now we get this opposite colored bishop position. And with opposite colored bishops, now the point switches to who is attacking. And now that our pawn has gone from f2 to f4, our king is a lot weaker than the opponent's because of this diagonal where the queen and the king are. So this was very unnecessary. We could just again push our extra pawn and create a queen, and this should be enough to win the game. But after f4, now we get a different stage of the game. Now our extra pawn, well, it's still this one, and we should push it, but now it will be a lot more difficult. Now this is hanging. After rook a8, we're actually just losing the pawn. And now we are still up a pawn. Now it is more of an endgame, and we should be able to win this, especially if our opponent plays g5, weakening the light squared diagonal. And here white takes, black gives a check, takes back. And now we have to understand why we're winning. So we're not winning because we have an extra pawn, because in opposite colored bishop positions, and having one extra pawn is usually not enough to win. So we need something more. So either another pawn or some kind of other advantage. For example, an attack on the king, which is likely in some positions here. If we give a check, he will have to go back with the bishop. But this is not the case at the moment. So we can win another pawn with rook c5 specifically. And now there is no way to defend the pawn. Instead, rook d7 was played, which is more natural maybe to keep the rook on the 7th rank. But before making any move, we have to think about what the opponent can do. And after this, he can't defend at all. If d4 will take this pawn. And here, after rook d7, he can simply defend the pawn. And now it's not really possible to win. So c4. Generally, I would suggest not exchanging pawns when we're trying to win, because now, well, if everything is on the same side, now it will be extremely difficult to win, because if the rooks are exchanged, black should hold an easy draw. But instead, rook a2 is played, king f3, and now black can't really take, because now this is a fork, and the black can't really defend the f7 point, not to mention the rook is attacked anyway. So king h7 is played, but this gives up the rook. But either way, already white is going to pick up another pawn, and with 3 against 1, that should already be winning. So as mentioned, we need something more than a pawn, but we shouldn't really exchange pawns like this. We could have just picked this one up. And the way to find a move like this is to look for at least 3 candidate moves on every move. So here rook d7 is one candidate move, rook c5 is another candidate move. Something else can be another candidate move, maybe improving the king or something, or giving a check. But before making a move, we should have some kind of list. And rook d7 is clearly not the best move, because we're not achieving our goal of winning the pawn because of the simple move rook a5, which we should have seen. But overall, it's quite a good game by white. And talking about a plan, well, it's usually about the pawn structure, and especially when we have a pawn advantage, the plan is usually to find where we have the majority of pawns. And here the majority of pawns is right over here, 1 against 0. No one is stopping this pawn, so it is a passed pawn. So we should improve it as much as possible, and the further it goes, the stronger it will become.